Thank you so much for tuning in today. There's another episode of the Kindco Sustainability Podcast. I'm your host, Jana, and today we're joined by the lovely Twyla Dell. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Fantastic.
I am excited about sustainability because I spend a lot of time writing about it and writing about why we don't have it. So it's a good subject to be talking about.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. When I heard a bit more about yourself, I knew I just had to get you on and really start hearing more about how someone like you can really share your story and what we can be doing to perhaps make a change.
Yeah.
So tell us.
I started out on a farm in Oregon, and I found out about sustainability without ever knowing what it was, because we planted crops each year and we harvested them and we did it again and again. And that's what sustainability is all about, being able to reuse nature without destroying it. So that was a good lesson. And then I moved from Oregon down to the central coast of California, spent my high school years looking into tide pools and watching the surf break on the rocks. And that was another whole education. So I got 2 points of view on nature, very different points of view that carried me throughout my life. And it was wonderful for me to finally get a chance to work at the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 7 in Kansas City. And I just felt like I'd been given a badge to protect what I had enjoyed in my childhood. That was really great fun. I loved it. And I was all too brief. And so then I decided to start the Foresight Institute in Kansas City, which was an environmental leadership program for business and community leaders. And then I shared more of that kind of enthusiasm for protecting nature.
Fantastic. So well versed with the sustainability route. So tell us a bit more about kind of, you gave us a rough overview of how you got into this. It kind of was just natural. It was part of your family, part of your upbringing. But
Right.
you know, what made you take that step a bit further and continuing that with your leadership program?
Well, I loved working at EPA. I was a public participation specialist. That was during the Carter administration, and we were to help affected populations work through environmental problems that the EPA was beginning to clean up. And I really hadn't thought much about the environment per se. I mean, it wasn't all that big a question at that time. But once President Reagan came in and cleaned out EPA, so I was forced to leave. And I thought, well, I really like the idea of standing up for nature. It would just seem to me to be the best thing. And so that's why I created the environmental protection, or the leadership program, because I was a teacher and an educator and a nature lover, and it all channeled that way. My first book came out in 1990 in honor of the Environmental Leadership Program. This is Call of the Rainbow Warrior, an environmental fable, and it is about the Brazilian rainforest burning, which was a big issue in 1990. I was about 15 years ahead of the curve as far as environmental action is concerned. And I just heard the other day on the news that the rainforests are still burning 30 years later. They have been called the lungs of the world, as you may know. And so one lung is gone because they're half gone. And I guess my book didn't stop the rainforest from burning, but it's still a good story. And then in 1996, I brought out the Corporate Environmental Leader, 5 Steps to a New Ethic. This is for business leaders, how to reduce the waste and enlarge their footprint in a green way, reduce waste and maximize resources. So that was a good addition to the literature. And then of course we have this one. I had to go back to graduate school, got a Ph.D. in environmental studies at Antioch University, Keene, New Hampshire, and published this one myself. And this is the Fueling Change, the Once and Future Kansas City, which reveals a city growing robustly through the use of fossil fuels and now coming to the point that it must stop and pick up a new fuel in order to go forward.
Oh, wow. Okay, so go back to your first book there. So it's when you wrote about that book and you
Yes.
were aware of the Amazonian rainforest burning? are you, you know, and just recently it was publicized on the news. There was a big fundraising ordeal about it where it was ablaze again. So, what part of your book does it share about? Is it just more about sharing the awareness of it, or what?
This
Yeah.
this is an environmental fable, and it's about a family of monkeys living in the rainforest and what happens to them. And then it also has a lumber baron in Washington State who is becoming aware of the environmental question, and he's visited by the rainbow warrior. It's a fable, and so we're connecting the lumber in Washington with the rainforest burning and how we need to stop just wholesale cutting down our forests.
Do you know if that had any impact, or was it?
I have no idea. I handed out as many as possible. What happens with environmental educators is that they put out the word, and each one who hears it goes and does some small thing, and thereby we slow down the deterioration is all we do. I had a co-teacher who said, "Oh, don't use more than one paper towel when you dry your hands." Okay, so we all cut down the paper towel use. It's called an enormous number of simple acts. And that's how we were laying it out at that time. That was before the global warming gained a lot of strength. And so we had many different messages of how to take better care of the resources that we used.
Fantastic. So did that then spur on your next book?
Well, after I had business people in my environmental leadership program for 6 years, and EPA had just changed from being totally punitive. See, it was founded in 1970, and they did everything they could to get people to comply with the regulations for 20 years. And in 1990, they decided they were going to create some programs that would create good behavior, not just punish for bad behavior. So that was a big turnaround. That happened to be the year that I started this. And so they started the Energy Star program and some other programs in which they gave awards for good behavior, the carrot and the stick idea. And so I wrote this for corporations to, I don't know where it went. I wrote this for corporations to take a look at their practices, and many of them have done a wholesale job. Kansas City is a very hotbed of progress in environmental saving resources and reducing waste. So this is a very good city as an example of that. The city itself cut back their carbon dioxide by 30%. Their garbage trucks, police cars, and all that kind of thing, their city fleets have reduced their use of fuel by 30%. That's wonderful. Now they're going for carbon neutral in the next few years, and the city has many fine examples of corporations that are doing as well.
Fantastic. Would you be able to share maybe a couple of tips or tactics that you wrote about in your book or from your leadership program that you can share with us, just to give us an understanding of the types of things that you were talking about back in those days? And I'm pretty sure, I haven't read the book, but I'm pretty sure that some of the tactics that you're probably going to mention could still be true today. And
oh, that's so very true. This is you have a pyramid like this that is about environmental regulation, which was the only thing that had been asked for. And then we get into conservation. This is step 2, elimination of waste. And then research and development, benign by design. And this was a very big thing in the 1990s, was to do products that were biodegradable. Up until then, we didn't pay any attention to it at all. And then you go into innovation, which is leadership in the market, and then integration, which is the corporate culture, the transformation, the owning of the mind, so to speak, of the idea that we need to take care of the earth. It becomes something that was once a small population that was asking people, and now it's gone into the general public. So that is the true transformation. of a corporation when the top staff all the way down to the bottom, they're all thinking about reducing and eliminating waste and using less energy, becoming more efficient, more creative, outreach to the community, all that kind of thing. So over the last 30 years, the general business posture has changed a good deal. Not all of them by any means, but a good deal. We have the oil companies yet to do something with, and that's the next step.
Yeah, so I mean, you've shared some great things there. Not these principles of we've seen some great steps being made by corporations today, and the mindset of the individuals and is focused on climate change, the environmental impact. It sounds like
Right.
lots been done, but what do you think? Why isn't this slowing down? Why is it still a big problem if
Why
everyone?
isn't what slowing down?
The degradation of the planet, what the damage of the planet. Why?
Well, for one thing, we live on a sea of oil and gasoline, and so it's pretty hard to separate ourselves from that. And that is the big challenge of the 21st century, is to exchange the fossil fuel for the renewable fuel, to get to the continent of sustainability, if you will. The engine is renewability, and the more we get into renewal rather than consumption, the closer we can get to some kind of level of sustainability. And we have so much momentum going. I mean, we're just a huge engine chewing up this planet. And so to stop that and to replace it, that's the challenge of this generation. We have to do it as fast as we can. And that is what we are just beginning to get a hold of.
Right. So what does sustainability mean to you then, Twyla?
Well, sustainability means that you are reducing your waste to zero, and you are recreating a natural cycle that can renew every year. That's what we call resilient and sustainable, if you can renew it every year without further mining the planet. But I don't think we're anywhere close to that. That's why I say sustainability is a continent off in the distance, and we look at it and we said, yeah, we got to get there. I want to be there. How do I do that? Oh, you mean when I drive, I should use less gasoline? Every time you pick up your car keys, you should think about using less gasoline. This is one of the most powerful things we can do, because each of us has the power to use less to the point of elimination, which we all need to do collectively if we're going to make it off to the continent of sustainability, if I may.
Yeah, I hear you. So why is this important to you? Why do you care so much about the system?
I have children. I have grandchildren, and the forecasts for the planet are dire, and I don't want to leave it to them. I dedicated this book to my two sons who were in high school at the time, and now they have kids in high school. And I personally have not been able to stop the world, even though I've tried it. And so we just have a lot of quick action to do. I'm going to read you something from Shell Oil Company that says, this is about the Paris Protocol. A big message from them. It is possible. That involves an eye-watering rewiring of the global economy in 50 years. I don't think we have 50 years, but it is technologically, industrially, and economically possible if we as global society choose to make it happen. So we haven't chosen it yet. We're still in the old paradigm, looking, going, well, yeah, we got to get past that. Nearly everything in this is either eye-watering or awe-inspiring. So we have the greatest adventure ahead of us that mankind has ever undertaken, that we can willfully slow down, stop the momentum of the fossil fuel age and move into the solar age. And that is no small task.
No, certainly not. And this, I guess, is what you write about in your latest book.
Yes, so absolutely.
Tell us a bit more about that. Tell us a
It,
bit more
it,
about Twyla.
it is about Kansas City, the once and future Kansas City, because it reveals how a city grew and changed from a village in 1820 to a city of 320,000 a century later. That is just combustive growth. Happened to be historically a very exciting place, right at the edge of the known world, right at the edge of the unknown world. Kansas City grew from a fur trading post in 1820 to a city 100 years later of 320,000. So that's an amazing growth. It's probably the last city born in the wood age. In 1830s, the first steamboat came upriver. This was the first combustion engine, right? And we're still in the wood age. We're burning wood, but boy, we have an engine for the first time. So by the 1850s, there were 750 steamboats a season coming upriver to trade in Kansas City. There were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people going west to the California gold fields in Oregon and southwest to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So all of that I've told in terms of fuel. And one of the things I wanted to show was this. This is the Osage Indians. These are not the Osage Indians, they're prototypes, but this is the way Indians used fuel. They sat around close with a very small fire. The women were always in charge of the fire. And the reason for that is that they had to cook. And each day they went to the chief's lodge and took fire very carefully, because the whole village was made of saplings woven together. So you can imagine as those dried up, conflagration was always a threat. I don't know how they had the courage to do it. And yet the women made these little tiny fires out of driftwood and fed everyone, whereas the white families, the EuroAmericans, they came in with all their technology. If you can look at this picture and see, there's a covered wagon, there's horses, there's wheels, there's the axe, there's a saw, there's the pot. This is all the technology that the EuroAmericans brought in, and they would create huge fires. They'd burn a whole log, and everybody have to sit way back because they got too hot. And the Indians would sit beside a tiny little fire and get the same heat. And that was the difference in realization of how to use the resources, how to live in that space.
Why do you think that was? Because
Well, it's a difference in tools. The American Indians didn't have the axe, the hatchet, any metallurgy at all. So they had to live without destroying their environment. If they'd had those tools, they would have done it. And so that's the difference. They learned to live between earth and sky. They never mined coal or anything. And so each year it was their job to make sure that the same resources were there that had been there the year before, because they had other tribes around them who were using their resources in their way. So the Osage Indians lived in central Missouri, dominated it for a good 600 years. And yet when the EuroAmericans came in, it looked like a pristine environment. The forest still stood, the meadows were full, the buffalo roamed on the plains, and the intelligence and wisdom that these tribes used to maintain that minimal lifestyle and still be comfortable, it was amazing. We've lost all of that now. And so as we look at living sustainably sometime in the future, the most we can hope for is an electronic cottage, perhaps, among the cornfields. We'd be bioregional. We could walk outside and pull a ear of corn off the stalk and take it in. You know, I don't know how we're going to live sustainably. Or are we going to go back to the kind of very delicate balance that the Osage Indians had?
Yeah, because there's going to be a lot of people out there that, you know, that never, you know, they don't understand the concept of coming from the Indians living around a fire. To them, that's historic. That's the past. We wouldn't have been able to, firstly, have this conversation today through the evolution of technology, the internet, without, if we lived sustainably like the Indians did then around our small campfires without tools, or using certain resources that were available to us,
Right.
be where we were today. So what do you think, what's your opinion on that, and how do we transition from this huge beast, as you said earlier, this big engine that's just consuming to perhaps
Well, the only way we can get there is to go more and more renewable. We are about 11% into renewable fuels right now. And so we have this curve to get up to 50%. 50% renewable, which is a huge societal change, would put us into sustainability. We can't be there at 11%, obviously. So everything we do, we have to get behind that and move it up to 51%. And then maybe we can go down the other side. We'll never completely eliminate oil and gasoline, but if we can get 50% cutback as soon as possible, we have a chance of peeling back global warming. If we do it very quickly, 50 years is way too long. It's way too relaxed an attitude, in my humble opinion.
So another thing I wanted to touch base on from the book is, why Kansas? What was important about that? And
to me, or to history?
Both. You know, why would you write about Kansas City?
Well, because the very concrete fact is that in doing a dissertation, I did not want to have to travel far. I had classmates who were walking through Madagascar looking for lemurs, and I didn't want to do that. And I had another classmate who went to West Africa studying bushmeat, and I didn't want to do that. I mean, those are very exotic ways. And even though I've done a lot of world travel, I realized that the study was right before me. I was interested in fuel and energy transitions. That's my specialty. And as I dug into Kansas City, I realized it had a wonderful story to tell that had never been told. Even though there are many, many books about Kansas City, nobody had looked at it as this particular nugget of wonderful energy history.
Fantastic. So this book goes on to explain relatively the history of where you live. It was right on your doorstep, and it's told a remarkable story of transitioning from, as you say, wood age through to where we are now, oil and gas, semi renewable. And do you cover the future? What do you give?
Yes, and this is my signature statement up here on the back. History is simpler than we think. It's all about fuel all the time. And we have absolutely ignored this. It's always been about politics and heroes, and we have a mythology about how humans have treated the earth, which they have, but in the background it's all about fuel all the time. So the future is that we change fuels. We just have to. And that is something we can start anywhere, and we can certainly take a hold of it here. If I may, I want to tell you about what happened in 1895. We had a sudden change of fuel that brought us to the present moment. Please. Shall we go ahead with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So 1895, the United States was full of horses. It was all horse all the time, whereas in Europe, they had already created the automobile. And we have to realize what an idea automobile was at that time. So in 1888, the Europeans already had automobiles, but in 1895, the Americans did not. They had 4 car makers in 4 different areas. They didn't talk to each other. And Henry Ford was trying to get the body of the car together. He'd already figured out the engine, but there were a couple of brothers who had figured out the car, the Duryea brothers. And so in 1895, we were still deep in the horse age. And if you went outside, it smelled to high heaven. You had horses, thousands of horses leaving behind about 20 pounds of horse pucky a day, and about a quart of urine, and there was nowhere for it to go but the streets. And amazingly, women wore long skirts almost touching the ground. So it was really, I don't know what they were thinking. So at any rate, the Chicago Times-Herald in Chicago decided to hold the first automobile race in America. And they set it up for the 4th of July, which was a very American holiday. They wanted to stick it in the eye of the Europeans, like, we can do this, watch us. Well, they didn't have enough cars to get to the starting line. The whole thing was a bust. That's how few cars we had in America. So a couple of months later, they tried it again, still had no cars get to the starting line. Meanwhile, a publisher in New York decided to write a magazine called The Horseless Age. This is their mascot. Now think about this, what an idea the horseless age is. Humans had been using horses for 6,000 years. This was not an easy uncoupling. I mean, they were just together. And so people said, well, I can't give up my horse. What are you talking about? And yet he did not know what to call what came next. He only knew that this was the end of this. I love this idea. It was just poised right there between the two failed auto races and the one that eventually succeeded. He brought out this magazine. So the day after Thanksgiving, also a very American holiday, we were still going to stick it in the eye of the Europeans. They had it in Chicago, and they finally got a field of 16 cars to come. It had snowed 6 inches of snow. It was bitter cold. It was not the race that they started out with at the 4th of July. So they had the electrics, they had the steamers, and they had the gasoliners. Now, the electrics had been the only successful car around, pretty much, because they could run around town on the paved streets. There were no paved roads. The roads in America were abysmal. And so they start off, the electrics had already got their relay stations set up so they could recharge. The race was 60 miles long. And it should have been about 6 blocks. That's what they were capable of. But so the electric started out and they died out before they got to the first recharge station. So that eliminated them. And then we get to the steamers, and it was so cold they could not get up ahead of steam to start it out. So finally the gasoliners took over. And the Germans had shipped over one of the Benzes that they had invented in 1888. It was a more mature car, and they were certain they were going to show up the Americans. And everybody was terrified that they would. But unfortunately, they slipped into a ditch and were not able to finish the race because the roads were terrible. And so they had to be pulled out by a team of horses, of course. And the car that won the race was the Duryea brothers. Looked like this. And it's a pretty sturdy looking car. And this was the first car in America ever in 1893, and they ran it in the race, and they won $2,000, which was a lot of money in those days. And they started up a car manufacturing. And that's how cars started in America. 5 years later, a new magazine came out called The Motor Age. They had finally figured out which direction they were going in and left the horseless age behind. And within 5 more years, the streets were full of cars. And that's how fast it happened, letting go of the horse after 6,000 years. So it's a tremendous moment in history. They had all kinds of technology. They had the telephone, they had electricity, they had movies, they had a bunch of stuff, but the streets were full of old paradigm thinking. And if we bring that forward 120 years, we are in the same place. We have all kinds of technology, but our streets are full of old paradigm thinking. And instead of really getting behind electric cars, we're into flying cars and self-driving cars. Those are old ideas catching up. What we really need is to publish a magazine called The Gasless Age. This is where we need to be, and this is where we can be. And to some extent we are. And then we need to very quickly go into the renewable age.
Right, fantastic. That story there it definitely made me think that we are very caught up in our ways, right? We're not,
Right.
we don't want to let go of things that are comfortable. They get
We're
us
deeply,
around.
deeply invested in that, money-wise, ego-wise.
Yeah. So do you have any suggestions or perhaps ideas on what a gasless age looks like?
Well, it looks like at first electric vehicles, and then a lot more mass transportation, and then a change of the way cities are designed. This would be a third stage kind of thing. If we are to move into sustainability, we have to stop making a lot of unsustainable things. And that's the toughest part, is to stop robbing the earth of the last of her resources and to really become aware of a much gentler approach to this very weary earth. The earth talks to us all the time. You know, the fires, the storms, the heat. This is the earth shouting at us, and we are not listening. And so we need to start listening and paying attention. And like a parent, like the mother she is, we need to say, "Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, mom, I get it. We're
Yeah.
stopping."
It's she's sending out warning signals. She's letting us know,
All the time,
but
all
we're
the
too
time.
invested into this current
We're
way.
very spoiled children.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, so you go and sharing a remarkable story and your views and some pointers on how we can start lessening our grip on gas and oils. So I would recommend our listeners go and pick up a copy and have a little read through. It will evoke some ideas, and perhaps could be one of the listeners that become a reader that then spurs on the change, maybe develops something that we can work towards in the
I
future.
hope so. You know, we're at a point where we tell our children, you can do anything, you can be anything. Their job is going to be to save the world, and they can be very, very creative in doing that. We need a lot of new technology to take the place of running a gasoline powered car around. Oh, I have a story, if I may, about this. About 6 weeks ago, I got an email from my veterinarian who said, Nico needs a stool sample analyzed. This is my dog, my rescue dog. And so there's only one way to get a stool sample to a veterinarian. You drive it there. And so it's 6 miles away. And I thought, how can I avoid the 6 mile drive? 6 miles back, half of a gallon gasoline. And so can I just not do it? Or can I delay it? Or can I combine it? Or can I transform it into some kind of electronic communication? So I thought, what if the veterinarian had a membership among her customers? And for that, you got this little electronic device on which you can smear a little bit of dog poop. And that electronic device will send a message to the veterinarian, and the vet analyzes it and says, Nico doesn't have worms. Okay, we've saved ourselves a couple of trips. You see, these are the kinds of replacements to driving that we need to make, that we can think of once we bring it into question. Once we get over the idea that we grab our car keys and we go anywhere we want to anytime, we just have to start creatively thinking. So the youth of today and the youth of tomorrow, this is their job.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, not that for me, I live in London. It's probably not the best place to drive around in anyway. And I was, when I lived out in the countryside, where I used to live with my parents, driving was what I believed was part of it, part of life. You had to have a car to get around, get to the places, because the towns were further
Right, right.
apart.
That's the way it's designed.
Yeah, and being over in the US and in Canada, the towns and the cities are so far apart that the only
Right,
way to commute is by road now. So I
right.
think what we're going to have to do is come up with some remarkable ideas and have someone, a group of, well, collectively, we need to make a decision that this isn't working, and how are we going to fix it? Do we set up more ecological routes? Can we do a pass the parcel sort of thing to get packages to people? Can we use more reliable, sustainable methods of delivery, perhaps like people on bikes, electronic
Yeah,
cars?
yeah, yeah. It goes beyond having recycled boxes. because any sustainable thing that we have, coffee filters, whatever, live in a sea of unsustainability. These are little atolls, little islands in a sea of unsustainability. We have to flip that completely over. And we just need to do it very quickly.
Yeah.
And there is an article just came out. See if I can find it. Scientists underestimated climate change. This came out yesterday in The Week. I think that's a British publication. And they talk about seas are warming rapidly and the Antarctic ice sheets, once believed stable, are crumbling and melting, blah, blah, blah. The big thing that we have to hear from the planet, from Mother Earth, is that we cannot allow the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, to melt. And this indicates that they are. Because once we pass the point we cannot create refrigeration on this planet, then it becomes a very different place. The poles have to be saved. They are the balancing points of the planet. They make it what it is. The idea that we could let those melt and still live some kind of life that we know now is just not possible. And they are the libraries. I mean, you can put a core down and take an ice core out and get 1 million years worth of information. We don't even begin to appreciate how valuable and important these two poles are. And so that's why there's an urgency beyond what we have been willing to accept at this point.
Yeah. So how do you feel?
Once the ice cream melts, it's over, baby.
So what do you feel about a remarkable chap, Elon Musk, and his expedition and idea to get to Mars? Perhaps do you think he's perhaps turning his back on Earth as it is, and he's trying to get us off? Do you think that perhaps, do you support that, or do you think we should focus on what we have?
I didn't hear the name of the person you were talking about.
Elon Musk and space.
Oh, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Well, you know, he's in the right direction. He's still in the old paradigm. That's where we are. That's what evolution is about. You use the old paradigm to get to the new paradigm. You get to a point where you are leaving stasis behind. You're going into the hybrid, which is where we are now. This is where Elon Musk is. And then you get to the brink, and this is where the 51% comes in. You get to the brink, and then you go over to the top, and you've created the revolution. And those are the steps you go through. There's no changing those. He's wonderful in his leadership, and I wish him well. But he's very much in the old paradigm. I went to the Tesla showroom the other day, and here's this gorgeous car. And that's an old paradigm with a new engine. That's fine. That's where we are. But we're going to have to leave that behind fairly quickly and find some other way to live.
Yeah. So it's just the expediting the technology advancements. It needs to happen quickly.
Right.
Whether we make it happen as quick as, you know, the 6,000-year-old side-by-side lit coexisting with horses into gasoline and cars, I think we've held on to it too far. And do you think that's also because you can only make certain amount, back in the day, you could only make a certain amount of money out of horses. But today you make companies are making huge amounts of money from the products that come from gasoline and fossil fuels.
Oh yeah. There's been the kind of wealth here that was unimaginable even a few years ago. I mean, the wealth from the oil age is, it's just mind-boggling. Too bad it isn't spread out evenly, but that's another subject. But you know, that's why it's so difficult to get the oil companies to be from which they make all their wealth. I mean, who does that? But they're going to have to. And British Petroleum and Shell are two of the leaders. There are probably others, but I've seen them in the news the most. And they have to get behind it. They just have to, for humanitarian, because they live on the planet. No matter how rich you can be, you still live on the planet. And you cannot separate yourself from that.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So for our listeners, do you have any sustainable products or environmentally friendly products that you're using now that you absolutely love and that you could share with us?
I should have researched that answer better. No, Everything floats on a sea of unsustainability. Biodegradable products, sure, but they've used energy for creation, and they're going to be driven to the landfill using fossil fuels. So I can't say that I do in the purest sense.
Okay, that's a interesting one. So,
I'm sorry.
okay, so what's the most sustainable that you think? I know you can't. So, look, you've got to live as well. We've all got to live in this
Right.
sea of unsustainability, right? So, how are you? What decisions are you making that you can share with us that you believe are the best steps forward?
Well, the ones that are in the news, trying to, and this is nothing new, the idea of plant-based eating is important, but the plants have to be local. If they're shipped in from 1,500 miles away, as most of our food is, then that kind of defeats the whole idea, although plant-based eating is good for your health. The idea of living very, very local. And so the farm to table is kind of a reflection of that. And to defeat the manufacture of food and the long distance carrying of food, if you can buy locally, eat locally, that's a very, very big step.
Fantastic. So that, in the sense that the transportation of your goods that you're eating needs to be.
Transportation is the big villain. Big villain. 30% of our carbon dioxide comes from transportation, and that's why the key to using less gasoline is right at the ignition point. How do you change that pattern? And my whole thrust is to get people together in groups of neighborhood, church, work, and say, how do we defeat this? How do we change the patterns? And we start with the first year, and that's just kind of taking up the slack. And then the second year, you've got to depend on other modes of transportation. You've got to become very inventive. By the third year, you're stretching way out against, away from gasoline. You're kind of out there in the middle of nowhere. And what am I doing now? I can't use this anymore. I've sold my car. Where's the bus? You know, this is a wonderful moment of forced evolution in a direction we need to go.
Okay, so what I got from that is perhaps create a group of community.
Many community groups who can cooperate with each other. So we don't make so many individual trips, for instance. Use your neighbors, delay, whatever, and just become, it was like the Second World War, you know, people became, excuse me, became very clear about what they had to do.
Well, look, it's fantastic. I think you've really helped. You've definitely inspired me to make better decisions in whether to, opt to take the train or jump on my bike. I sold my car a good few years ago. It just, for me, it wasn't sustainable enough. It wasn't the right means of transport for me. I could get around easily if I planned my day, and I wanted to do what I could for the environment, and I try and drive the least amount possible. Now we are trapped in this phase where we had to. It's difficult to get around without the vehicle or using gas.
Right.
But I'm looking forward to how that comes through. Making more local buying decisions is one thing you also recommended, whether that's food or journeys or resources. I think that's a fantastic one. That's one of the lessons.
We have enough electronics now to entertain us from any place in the world. We don't really need to travel the way we do. We're wearing out the planet just in tourism. And I realize tourism is floating on a sea of fossil fuel. And the unfortunate thing is that many different industries are going to feel the bumps and grinds of the change, and we all will. But those things have been going on anyway. And if the economy has any elasticity to it and any leadership, we will be able to make our way in the direction we need to go.
That's right. And the alternative is we're going to bear a lot more pain having to deal with the where the world's going to end up. It's probably not going to be a very safe environment to be raising kids in. Going outside may even be something that wouldn't be very good for us. Running out of resources. That's definitely going to be a stronger, more painful way to live than making these tough decisions today.
It's not probable. It is absolutely going to happen if we don't get a hold of it. Why would we put our kids through that? You know, we treasure them, we adore them, and then we kick them out the door and say, well, I'm sorry, there's just one thing I forgot to tell you. We didn't take care of the earth. Go do your best. You know, we can do better than that.
100%. Oh my God, that was valuable. That was very powerful. Thank you for that. Well, I hope listeners have been as moved as I was today. I'm certainly going to dive in a lot more into the book. Thank you very much for sending me a copy.
Yes, do let me know. Write me a review, will you?
I will do. And what
Thank you.
What I'll also do is if you can send me a link, I will share that with the listeners in the show notes, and
okay.
the listeners can go and grab a copy, read the show notes, and they'll find out more about what you've done, and hopefully also pick up some of your previous books. And
they're out of print, but the
lovely.
New one is, and I have a new book coming out in the spring on the founding of the Environmental Protection Agency between Edmund Muskie, Senator from Maine, a Democrat, and Richard Nixon, President of U.S., a Republican. Never spoke to each other, but they did manage to put together one of the most important agencies that we've ever had.
Oh, fantastic. So yeah, please look out for that. Share that with me. Is there anything else Is there anything else you'd like to share before we go?
Hurry. Get busy.
Thank you so much. Well, look, guys, thank you for listening. Twyla, you've been an absolute pleasure. And that was the Sustainable Podcast by Kindco. Thank you again for listening. And
thank you.
Wish you all the best.
You too.
I've been your host, Jana. This has been the Kindco Sustainability Podcast, and we exist to help you make better buying decisions. Please, can you leave us a review, share anything you've learned from today? I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.